morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Hello to you wherever you are. I am so glad that you're here with us today. And I wanted to take a moment and do a special episode called Love Don't Hurt, Understanding Domestic Violence. Love ain't supposed to hurt, okay? Listen, we need to do some serious um, evolving on this topic of how we interact with each other in domestic violence, interpersonal violence, whatever you want to call it. We don't know how to act. Okay, so let's get it together. Welcome to a special episode of Demystifying Mental Health, a special episode of Mind Your Amygdala podcast. This is us coming together to have a serious conversation about domestic violence. I am Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist. I teach, train, and explain all things about the brain. And I think that we wanted to call a special episode that's dedicated just to discussing domestic violence and what we can do to start as a community, specifically as an African American community, to have some language to discuss domestic violence effectively. Because I've been watching the news coverage of how we're addressing. Um, Listen, it's a lot of beef going on. Okay, got beef? Yes. I mean, people dropping diss albums and beef, and I'm a hip hop head. I love hip hop and R&B and music in general, especially music that moves us. And music can move us in positive ways and negative ways. And we have a problem in our entertainment industry. But even more than our entertainment industry, we have a problem in our culture. And because of the violence in our culture that we don't really like to talk about and acknowledge, that violence is translating into so many other parts of society. And we witnessed the culmination of that in the video that was released recently, where we saw an incident from 2016, I believe, with Diddy basically beating Cassie and assaulting her in the hotel hallway. So, without getting into explicit details about that particular incident, I think it's important for us to have uh, a backdrop of thinking about the science of domestic violence and trauma and really processing what that means to us as a community. So some statistics that I'd like to share with you, and I want this to put this in the context of our culture in America is still coming out of the culture of slavery, okay? Because we changed laws, and we began, as we began to realize that, hey, we have some differences, but we're more similar than different, right? There was a delusional state, and I talked about this. If you watch Demystifying Mental Health, the episode 2, we talk a little bit about how the the founders of America that came from Europe came in under the lens of being persecuted. They were experiencing trauma from their country, from their government, about how they wanted to practice their beliefs. And then they came to America and they traumatized a bunch of other communities. They looked at other human beings, and instead of seeing fellow God being, fellow spiritual being, we were still in that primitive mindset of looking and seeing animal, seeing something I can abuse, something I can, I can get this out of the equation. This will help me. And we've been in that mindset of committing violence upon communities that we don't understand, that we don't know, that we don't trust. And that is honestly, as American as bread and butter. Okay. Uh, so when we look at our statistics, because of systemic racism, which affects our system as well as our policies, both Black women and Black men experience domestic violence at higher rates than other communities. In fact, according to the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 45.1% of Black women experience physical violence, sexual violence, or stalking with intimate partners, while 40.1% of Black men experience those types of abuses. On average, 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence, and 1 in 4 men experience domestic violence. And if you really think about those statistics, we know that those are likely underestimated. It's only what they're able to capture, it's only what people are willing to admit to, and it's also what people actually experience and think of as domestic violence. Come on, let's keep it real. We just a few generations from it being okay to violently whip people and abuse them, even kill them in the name of them upsetting you. Okay. And only in these recent years do we have legal protections for women and legal protections of how far a person can go who's in your household with how much they can put their hands on you legally. We even still have debates around the world about can a husband force a wife, okay, or can one partner force another person if their marriage to engage in certain behaviors. And so we still have not reached a space in this world where we look at each other humans, no matter male, female, black, white, Asian, Indian, or any other version of humanity, and see them as a whole being that's a full person that has boundaries that should not be crossed or violated, and that they should be allowed to be fully themselves, whoever they define themselves as they grow in this world. That's not how we're raised. That's not how we're taught to think about ourselves. And so when we're thinking about domestic violence and the way that we grow up, a lot of people grew up in households where people put their hands on each other. That's what we call it. You know, if somebody get mad, somebody start yelling. This is not something that's exclusive, although we know statistically this happens more with men than women. It is not impossible that women put their hands on men. I've seen it. I've seen every version of this. And so I want to be clear that I'm not talking about this as it relates to heterosexual relationships, right? It doesn't matter if it's a man or woman. Sometimes it's woman, woman, man, woman. Sometimes it's, we have other ways that people characterize themselves. It's the act of two human beings trying to exist in the same space is hard, period. It's difficult. And then we also have poor emotion regulation. We're not taught about our emotions. They don't tell us they come from our brain and how we process things. They give us everything but that. They tell us our emotions or feelings are not important. They tell us to ignore them. They tell us that boys are not supposed to have emotions, girls have too many. All of that language gives us a false and impossible task not to feel, deduct emotions from the equation. All of those thought processes that we have are inaccurate, and not only inaccurate, they're unhelpful, they're damaging, they're delusional. They force you to think of life inaccurately, period. And so people who are most determined to not understand and not deal with their emotions are the ones who are most influenced by them. Our amygdalas are operating 24/7 to create emotional content, even right now. Wherever you are, just pause for a moment. Do me a favor, just and put a word to the emotion that you're feeling right now. You might be irritated from earlier in the day. You might be excited about something. You may be calm, relaxed, everything in between, stressed, paranoid, whatever that is, just identify that. That's not something that we're taught to do. And so when we are talking about extremely emotional, incompetent human beings attempting to navigate through life, bouncing off of each other, sometimes stuff goes down. I'm trying not to cuss, okay? Y'all know what I mean, okay? Ish hits the fan. And when we are emotionally challenged, that's the time where this body revs up, this animal revs up. And in that space, that's when people are getting upset, getting aroused. The intensity of the emotions that they're feeling increases. It's not that it wasn't there, it's just now it's more intense. And you might be yelling, you might be um, doing some kind of behavior like going through a person's phone or getting into their. So when those things are happening, there are emotions present always. And when people are, especially when people are intoxicated, they're using drugs, it becomes a toxic spiral of poor decision making. I want to be clear that when like, man, I lost it, man, I went off, man, I screamed at that person, which again, when I talk about a man or woman thing, I want you to be thinking about yourself. I want you to be thinking about uh, this, where I most try to do is put people back in watching themselves, because it's very easy to see what other people are doing that is harmful, but you only have control over you. So I'm going to constantly redirect you back to thinking about, where do I damage the people in my life with my tantrums, with my outbursts, with my words? Because we can be violent with our words and how we talk to each other. And it's not just cussing, right? Cursing is one way of adding a little, I like to cuss, y'all. So I like adding a little spice on it, right? Right? It gets the point across a little bit more. There's a reason, because biologically it's pressing that point in with those words, right? And so when we think about how we talk to each other, we can be abusing somebody without putting our hand on them. Okay. I want to make sure I make that point, because domestic violence is not just physical. Although physical is one element of it, we're going to think about the whole spectrum of domestic violence, because we can go all the way to physical and sexual, where you're pressing that person to engage in behaviors they may not necessarily be consenting to. And it's different to not want to do something and then to be made to do it without consent, right? There's a level of impressing a person, your will on another person. That's violence, right? By definition. Even if you may feel like, well, I'm not being violent, the pressing someone into behaviors or actions that they are not enthusiastically consenting to do is a problem. And then even beyond the physical element of domestic violence, I want people to know you can't have physical domestic violence without having emotional domestic violence. Okay, don't stop trying to separate it. And you also cannot have verbal domestic violence without having emotional domestic violence. All of this goes together, because if you are verbalizing harmful words and in harmful ways, then you are impacting that person's psychology. So we like to try to make some kind of false separation between our physical body and our psychological body, or what I call our spiritual body. That is impossible. And stop it. You stop that. You can't go through something without it impacting your mind, your body, and your spirit altogether. Altogether now. Okay. So domestic violence and living with someone specifically who's abusive is dangerous. Okay, survivors are 3.6 more, excuse me, sorry, missed my notes here. Survivors are 3.6 times more likely to be killed when they're leaving. People ask a lot, like, why did they stay? Why didn't they leave? Why didn't they say something earlier? It bothers me that I even have to explain this. But if you have never been in a circumstance where you feel threatened in that way, God bless you. I'm so glad that your life has not had that element of trauma in it. For those of you who may not have had the extreme of a situation of what our dear sister Cassie had, with having someone who has so much power and control and influence and people around allowing those behaviors to happen. This happens in households where people don't hardly have anything and everything in between. Okay, so understanding that just leaving a circumstance where that is all encompassing, it's hard to leave home. It's hard to have the money to leave in these circumstances, especially when a person is so integrated in your life. People can be harmed even for evidence being found of them looking for ways out of whatever situation that they're in. So these people often know that this person will beat me, they'll hit me, they'll scream at me. And again, screaming is a form of psychological violence. You have a part of your brain called the somatosensory cortex. If you don't know about it, go back to the last episode of Demystifying Mental Health. It's your pain center and your somatosensory cortex. When people are yelling or someone is raising their voice, if you think about it, you can feel that in your body. I want you to start paying attention to the pain signals that your body receives every day from your interactions with people. And that's why it upsets us, right? That's why somebody can literally say something that, I felt that. I didn't like that. But we've been taught to ignore those internal signals and to not understand them or read them or appreciate them. So just understanding that a lot of times when people stay in these situations is because they are in fear for various reasons that you may not understand unless you know the full story and really choose to have empathy for them and recognize that you can empathize for a situation that you've never experienced simply by listening. Go look at Cassie's statement, because I think that her statement that she released recently, just acknowledging the support that she's received from people, not just friends and family, but from the public. I think that's a really important acknowledgement that she says it's about domestic violence, because this is not just her story. There are many other people out there, men and women, who have had the experience of in their own household with people that say they love you and that you love, and that we have learned this very toxic way of thinking about love and relationships where we think it's supposed to hurt, right? It's almost like if it doesn't have some pizzazz, if it doesn't have some drama, some people are like, "Oh, I don't want it. This is not what I'm used to. This is what." But when we grow up in environments where we've seen family members and other people who have uh, had these situations, and they continue to come back and they continue to deal with people, and we've learned these are learned behaviors all around us. We are watching people. Unfortunately, many of us have seen people put their hands on each other in our own households. So even though you may not have experienced that, you may have witnessed it. And as kids see more than we give them credit for. First of all, let's say that. So even the stuff we know that they see, I want you to know they see even more than that. And I'm going to talk in just a little bit about how domestic violence affects children. But I just want to acknowledge that survivors of domestic violence know often that the most dangerous time is when they're leaving and preparing to leave. And so I want all of us to have more empathy for the fact that without intervention, some people who are abusive will kill their partners. There are family members at risk. Every day, if you watch the news, you'll see that there are children and family members and bystanders and even first responders that are at risk of being harmed when domestic violence is allowed to prosper. In fact, for law enforcement, one of the most dangerous calls for a police officer is responding to a domestic violence incident. Okay, so we want to recognize that the motivation of abuse is control. And a lot of times people think that that it's just about money, that it's about power, or that it's about a drug or a sexual experience. It's about the control and making sure that what they want, whatever their urge is fulfilled. Okay. And so I also want to make sure that we acknowledge that a lot of people are trying to unravel, well, what would be wrong with someone like Diddy? What happened to them that they are like this? And I think that's an important question to ask, because the reality is that we're seeing these powerful men, and these are not just men. There are women often involved and tied up in these situations, and we're seeing the as Kat said, 2024 is the year of truth and revelations. Things are coming out in the wash, and we're seeing that lots of people allow themselves to treat other people however they want, right? And they take advantage of the fact that they have um, financial power over them, physical power over them, psychological power over them, whatever that looks like, that is still very much a part of our society. And it translates into what we call mental illness, right? People who experience these things, whether you have understand that you witnessing that happen to your auntie or your mother or father, or you witnessing or being a part of that thing, you then develop a worldview that's colored by these experiences. And that often is depression, that looks like anxiety, that looks like PTSD. But for so many people, they don't even recognize that dark cloud over the way that they think about people and the way they conceptualize their world because of those traumatic instances that they saw, or that they were a part of. And we know that cycle of abuse tends to passed down, right? It's so many people that may have witnessed their something happening in their household, and they're like, I ain't never gonna be like that when I grow up. I'll never do that to somebody that I care about. And then when they get older, yes, there's a lot of people that are like, I learned from that and I never go into that behavior, but that might also lead to repressive behaviors and not knowing how to talk about and communicate about things with other people. So holding things in. But then there's the other folks that get in that space and then they reflect those behaviors when they're in relationships. The tug of war that they saw their parents doing, the demeanor and the attitudes and the judgments and the way that they hear their family talk about the situation. Guess what? When they get in their relationships and things hit the fan, then they find themselves acting out, slamming fist on the counter, the threatening body posture, breaking things. Like, these are all things that are precursors to a person who is not controlling their animal effectively, right? Again, it still boils down to this amygdala. It ain't the devil. It's not the devil doing it. Stop trying to blame Lucifer, Beelzebub, for everything. It's you, boo, right? Understanding that our hormones, when we have the extreme things, like we know that when people inject performance steroids and testosterone, they can have what we call roid rage. Okay, that's the extreme example of how your hormones impact you. But we all have hormones every day that are impacting how patient we are and how fast we react to things and how intense it feels inside of us. And yes, my brothers, unfortunately, with your male testosterone, you have a harder uh, uh, um, your internal kitchen might feel more explosive, but it's still up to you to learn to control those behaviors, because you can. The anger that we feel still boils down to, how am I interpreting what's happening around me? What's my perspective? What's my belief? And how do I respond to that in real time? Am I going to cuss? Am I going to take some deep breaths, ground myself, and explain? Am I going to yell, scream, kick, throw things, be abusive, drag people, do whatever I want to do? Or am I actually going to figure out how to step away, calm myself, and take responsible, effective actions? It's not easy. It's not as easy to do as it sounds, I promise, but you can do it. Okay, so when we talk about when kids witness domestic violence, because I think it's really important to also put that the wrapping around how this impacts not necessarily the people who are doing the banging, right, but the folks around the kids, because domestic violence, when kids witness it, they often fear harm. They fear abandonment. One parent is going to leave, or the other parent, or somebody's going to get hurt or get killed or get put in jail. You're exposing that child to excessive worry, sadness, guilt, the inability to process their own emotions, having to shut down psychologically to cope, habitual lying and making things up to give themselves a different reality, low frustration tolerance, emotional distancing. Think about all of the ways that this impacts the child psychologically that you can't see. And then, because we're so incompetent about understanding emotions, we don't often recognize that, the physical behaviors and actions that are playing out in these children, is how we get to the challenges that we may have. Like you may notice them wetting the bed where they previously were not, or previously did, using the bathroom more often on themselves, harder to potty train. That can happen when the kids are experiencing their adults having these stresses. We think it's behind closed doors. We think we're keeping it down, but they can feel tension and hear things. And because they don't know how to process it and their emotions, their brain is immature, they have an even bigger emotional internal experience than adults do. So keep that in mind, right? So they can have bedwetting behaviors. They can have verbal, motor, and cognitive issues, meaning they don't learn as quickly, they don't respond as fast. They can have language difficulties. They can have self-harming behaviors, learning problems in school. A stressed brain does not retain information well. So some of these kids, when they're coming in school and they're trying to process, and the teachers are trying to teach, but what they see is what they think of as antisocial behavior. They see resistance, they see aggression, they see depression or irritability and anxiety. And what it really is the manifestation of this kid's home life is stressful. And even if they were in bed while their parents were fighting and arguing, or they know that somebody walked out the door and slammed it after fussing and cussing and all this stuff is happening, that still puts them in a position that they have to deal with it, and they often can act out. And for our boys, this can mean them putting themselves into risk of being in the legal system and in the prison pipeline. And it makes the boys more likely to be in the legal system, and it makes the girls more likely to become victims of domestic violence. And everybody is impacted by it. So I want you to remember that it's not just about you. If it is you that's in this space, I know many people have said, thank God I'm out of that relationship. And thank God that I've grown. And many people are triggered because what we saw takes people back to what they've been through. And that's normal. That's how our brain works. That's how trauma triggers. That's why you all need to come to the trauma cure so you can understand what your brain is doing. But if you are the person who is still in that space where you and your loved one, when it gets too hot, it gets physical. It doesn't, I don't know if I'm talking to the person laying hands or the person getting hands laid, or both, because let's keep it real. People put their hands on each other and go back and forth. And I know we like to act as if, men don't put your hands on women. And I'm of the firm belief nobody should be putting their hands on anybody. Keep your hands to yourself. That's what I tell anybody. There is no excuse for you taking words that you don't like and turning it into, I'm going to violate your autonomy. I'm going to violate this right here. You belong to you. And the other person belongs to themselves. I know we use language about possession like you're mine, I'm yours. Don't get me started on that. This is not the episode. But understanding that every human being on earth belongs to themselves. And when we move around and we're in relationships, there's many times where our possessive mentality makes us think we can do whatever we want to other people. But I want you to know that you are able to make whatever decisions and put things in place to get yourself into a safe space. So if you are dealing with domestic violence or an unsafe situation, or you know someone who is dealing with it, here's some information that could be helpful. There is a hotline. It's literally called thehotline.org. That is they provide essential tools. It's 24 hours, and they provide support to survivors of domestic violence so that they can have what they need around them to safely escape, to rebuild their lives, to relocate, to do have support and other things that they may need. So that is also, you can reach it at thehotline.org or 1-800-799-SAFE 7233. 1-800-799-7233 SAFE. Also, there is an organization called RAIN, RAIIN, which is a really important organization that is I know we own YouTube, so I'll say actual violence, and really talking about how a 24-hour hotline to help people know what their resources are. And that's RAINN.org. You can also call 1-800-656-4673. That's HOPE. 1-800-656-4673. If you need to save it in your phone, save it as something else, put another name on it. You know how to do that. All right. So I just want to say be safe. Okay. It's always important to have a plan. So if you are in a space where you know that you are ready to be free of that, please reach out for help. Just talk to someone, and just the someone, that they reach out to, just know you don't have to solve every problem. You just take it one thing at a time. So once again, thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist. If you would like more of this, please make sure that you hit that like button. That's a free way to support this podcast. And make sure that you follow me on social media. I'm Dr. Alauna, Alauna. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all of the above under Dr. Alauna, Dralauna. Thank you so much for being here, and it's time to evolve.